The Spy Who Never Existed. The leather-bound journal arrived at Professor Catherine Morrison's Oxford office on a gray November morning in 2019. No return address, no note, just a package wrapped in brown paper, postmarked from a village in Normandy she'd never heard of. Catherine had spent 30 years studying World War II intelligence operations. She'd interviewed the last surviving SOE agents, decoded Enigma transcripts, and published 4 books on Allied espionage. But when she opened that journal and saw the first entry dated the 6th of June, 1944, D-Day, her hands began to shake. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and French. The name on the inside cover read, Captain Jean-Luc Fontaine, French Resistance, Network Archangel. She'd never heard of him. And that was impossible. Catherine had catalogued every known resistance network in France. Archangel didn't exist in any Allied records, any Gestapo files, any post-war testimony. Yet here was a journal detailing 43 sabotage operations, 12 assassination missions, and the extraction of over 200 Allied pilots from occupied territory. All credited to one man, Jean-Luc Fontaine. The entries were meticulous. Dates, locations, German unit numbers, names of collaborators executed, railway bridges destroyed. On the 19th of August 1944, Fontaine claimed to have personally killed SS Sturmbannführer Klaus Richter in Lyon, a notorious butcher responsible for massacring an entire village. Catherine's pulse quickened. She pulled a reference book from her shelf. According to official records, Richter had died in Lyon on that exact date, but the report attributed his death to unknown partisans. She kept reading. September 1944. Fontaine described infiltrating Gestapo headquarters in Paris, photographing documents about a planned counteroffensive in the Ardennes intelligence that could have prevented the Battle of the Bulge. October 1944. He reported discovering a Wehrmacht supply depot hidden in the Vosges Mountains, coordinates included. November 1944. An entry that made Catherine's blood run cold. They are getting close. The Germans know someone is feeding information to London. They've executed 50 suspects this month. I've seen the bodies hanging from lampposts, signs around their necks. This is what happens to traitors. But they're looking for the wrong person. They're looking for someone who exists. Tomorrow, I meet my contact at the safe house. If this is my last entry, know that everything I've done, I did for France. J.L.F. The next page was blank. No more entries. Catherine flipped to the back of the journal. Tucked into the binding was a photograph, yellowed with age. It showed a man in his 30s, dark eyes, a thin scar across his cheek, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. The back of the photo bore a stamp. Paris, July 1944. Gestapo Intelligence Archive. Her heart stopped. This wasn't a resistance photograph. This was a German surveillance photo. Beneath it was a Gestapo wanted poster, the same face staring back at her. Wanted. Jean-Luc Fontaine. Terrorist. Saboteur. Reward. 100,000 Reichsmarks. Armed. And extremely dangerous. Jean-Luc. Reichsmarks. Jean-Luc. 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 Catherine's academic mind raced through possibilities. If the Germans had his photo, if they'd created wanted posters, then Fontaine was real. He had existed. But why was there no Allied record of him? Why had no historian, no veteran, no archive ever mentioned Archangel? She reached for her phone to call a colleague at the French Ministry of Defense, then noticed something else in the package. A second envelope, sealed with red wax. Inside, a single typed letter on aged paper. Professor Morrison, by now you have read the journal. You are wondering if Jean-Luc Fontaine was real. I can tell you the truth, but you must promise to publish what I'm about to reveal. Fontaine never existed. Every mission in that journal was real. Every German killed, every bridge destroyed, every pilot saved. All of it happened. But there was no Jean-Luc Fontaine. There was no network archangel. I should know. I created him. My name is Colonel William Ashford, formerly of the British Special Operations Executive. I am 98 years old, and I am dying. This letter and the journal are my confession. In 1943, we had a problem. The Gestapo was systematically destroying every resistance network in France. They'd infiltrate a cell, torture one member, and the whole organization would collapse. Hundreds were dying. So we created a ghost. Fontaine was a composite identity, a dozen different agents operating under the same name, the same legend. When the Germans hunted Fontaine, they were chasing a phantom. While they focused on one man, our real network survived. But here's what you need to understand. The Gestapo photograph you found? That's real. That man in the picture existed. His name was Etienne Moreau. He was a petty criminal we recruited in 1944. We gave him Fontaine's identity, planted him in Paris, and let the Germans find him. On the 12th of November 1944, the Gestapo arrested him at a cafe in Montmartre. They tortured him for 3 days. He never broke because he had nothing to tell them. He genuinely believed he was Jean-Luc Fontaine. We'd conditioned him so deeply that under torture, under drugs, he maintained the identity. They executed him on the 15th of November 1944, shot him in the courtyard of Fresnes prison. The Germans believed they'd caught their terrorist. Our networks breathed easier. The war continued. But Professor Morrison, here's the part that's kept me awake for 75 years. Etienne Moreau had a family. A wife, Marie. A daughter, Sophie, aged 7. They never knew what happened to him. The official story was that he'd been killed by Allied bombing. Marie died in 1967, still believing her husband was a criminal who'd abandoned them. Sophie is still alive. She lives in Normandy, in the same village your package came from. She's the one who sent you that journal. You see, 6 months ago, she found a trunk in her mother's attic. Inside were letters, coded messages that Etienne had hidden before his arrest. When decoded, they revealed everything. She knows her father died believing he was a hero named Jean-Luc Fontaine. She knows he saved hundreds of lives. And she knows that history will never acknowledge his sacrifice because officially he doesn't exist. That's why she sent you the journal. And that's why I'm writing this letter. Tell the world about the spy who never existed. Tell them about the man who died protecting an identity that wasn't even his own. Tell them about all the unnamed ghosts who won the war in the shadows. Because Sophie Moreau deserves to know her father was a hero. Even if his heroism was built on a lie. Colonel William Ashford, October 2019. Catherine set down the letter, her eyes stinging with tears. She looked at the photograph again at Etienne Moreau, the petty criminal turned legend. The man who never knew his real mission was simply to die. Her office phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number, she answered. Professor Morrison, a woman's voice, elderly, French accent. Did you receive my package, Professor? Is this Sophie? Yes, you've read the Colonel's letter. Now you must know there's more. The journal you have, it's not complete. There's a second volume, and it changes everything. Catherine's mouth went dry. What do you mean? The missions in the first journal, they happened. The Germans my father believed he'd killed. The bridges he thought he destroyed, all real. But Professor, my father was arrested in November 1944. The journal you have includes entries through March 1945, 4 months after his death. The room seemed to tilt. That's impossible. That's what I thought too, until I found something else in my mother's trunk. A letter from a German officer, written in 1947. He was dying, wanted to confess. His name was Klaus Richter. Catherine's blood froze. But Richter died in Lyon in 1944. Fontaine killed him. Sophie's laugh was bitter. Did he, Professor? Or did someone want everyone to believe that? Because according to this letter, Richter faked his own death and spent the last months of the war working for British intelligence. He was a double agent. And the man who recruited him, she paused, and Catherine could hear papers rustling, was Colonel William Ashford. Catherine's mind reeled. "You're saying—" "I'm saying the Colonel's letter is another lie, Professor. Fontaine didn't die to protect resistance networks. He died because he discovered something. Something about Richter, about Ashford, about a conspiracy that runs deeper than anyone imagined." "Then who wrote the journal entries after your father's death?" The line was silent for a long moment. When Sophie spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I think you should come to Normandy, Professor. There's someone here who wants to meet you. Someone who's been waiting 75 years to tell the real story." "Who?" "It's not Redent. He says his name is Jean-Luc Fontaine." "And Professor?" "He has photographs, documentation, proof that he's exactly who he claims to be." "Which means everything we thought we knew about the war." The line went dead. Catherine sat in her office as darkness fell outside, staring at the photograph of Etienne Moreau. Or was it Jean-Luc Fontaine? Or someone else entirely? She booked a flight to Normandy for the next morning. She had no idea she'd just taken the first step into a 75-year-old deception that would unravel everything historians believed about World War II. And she had no idea that in a nursing home outside Caen, an old man with a thin scar across his cheek was waiting for her, waiting to tell her the truth about the spy who never existed, and the war that never really ended. The nursing home outside Caen looked like any other sterile white walls. The smell of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, elderly residents shuffling through corridors. Catherine Morrison had expected something different, something darker, for a meeting that might rewrite history. Sophie Moreau met her at the entrance. She was 78 years old, but her eyes held the sharpness of someone who'd spent a lifetime seeking answers. They shook hands without speaking, and Sophie led her down a hallway to a private room at the end. "Before you meet him," Sophie said, her hand on the doorknob, "you need to understand something. I've spent 6 months verifying his story. Documents, photographs, testimony from other veterans. Either this man is who he claims to be, or he's the most elaborate fraud in history." "Which do you believe?" Catherine asked. Sophie's expression was unreadable. "I believe my father died in Fresnes prison in 1944. I believe he was tortured by the Gestapo. I saw his death certificate. But I also believe," she paused, "I also believe that what we've been told about the war is incomplete. There are pieces missing, and this man has them." She opened the door. The old man sat in a wheelchair by the window, silhouetted against the gray Norman sky. When he turned, Catherine saw the scar, the same thin line across his left cheek that she'd seen in the photograph. "Professor Morrison," he said in French, his voice surprisingly strong for someone who appeared to be in his late 90s. "Thank you for coming. I've been waiting a very long time to tell this story." Catherine sat down across from him, her recorder already running. "Sophie says you claim to be Jean-Luc Fontaine." "I don't claim anything, Professor. I am Jean-Luc Fontaine, born the 12th of March 1921, in Marseille. Joined the resistance in 1942. Recruited by British intelligence in 1943. And yes, I am the author of that journal." "Then who was Etienne Moreau?" The old man's eyes grew distant. "Etienne was my friend, and my greatest regret." He wheeled himself closer, reaching into a folder on his lap. He pulled out a photograph. 2 young men in their 20s, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. One had a scar on his cheek. "That's me," he said, pointing to the man with the scar. "And that's Etienne. We grew up together in Marseille. When the war started, we both joined the resistance. But Etienne was reckless, brave but foolish. He got arrested in 1943 for stealing German supplies. They would have executed him, but I made a deal with British intelligence." Catherine leaned forward. "What kind of deal?" "The British wanted to create a ghost, a legendary operative that the Germans would hunt obsessively. They needed someone real enough to be believable, but controllable. He was already in custody, already facing death. We could give him a new identity, a purpose, and if he was eventually caught, the Germans would think they'd caught their phantom. You used your friend as bait? Pain flickered across the old man's face. I saved his life, Professor, for 18 months. The alternative was immediate execution. And, yes, I'm aware of how that sounds. I've lived with it for 75 years. Sophie spoke from behind Catherine. Tell her about the journal. Fontaine nodded. In 1944, Ashford's plan was working. The Germans were hunting Jean-Luc Fontaine while I operated under different identities. But in October of that year, I discovered something. Klaus Richter, the SS officer I supposedly killed in Lyon, he hadn't died. I found evidence that he was communicating with British intelligence. Secret meetings, coded messages, bank transfers. Catherine's mind raced. Richter was a double agent? Worse, Richter was running a network of German officers who wanted to survive the war. They were selling intelligence to the British, yes, but they were also ensuring that certain Nazi war criminals would escape justice. Scientists, intelligence officers, people with valuable knowledge. Operation Paperclip. Professor, you've heard of it? The American program that recruited Nazi scientists after the war. It started earlier than anyone admits, and it wasn't just Americans. The British had their own version, and Ashford was facilitating it. He was building his post-war intelligence network by making deals with devils. Fontaine pulled out another document, a typed list of names. I found this in Richter's office in Lyon, before I faked his death to protect him. Every name on this list was a German officer scheduled for extraction after the war. Scientists, cryptographers, spies. People who should have faced trial at Nuremberg. Catherine scanned the list. Her breath caught. Several names were familiar scientists who'd later worked for British intelligence, engineers who'd helped build NATO's early warning systems. When I confronted Ashford about this, Fontaine continued, he gave me two choices: become part of the operation or disappear. I refused, so he activated the final phase of his plan. He told the Germans where to find Etienne. Sophie's voice was hollow. My father was betrayed by his own side. Etienne was arrested believing he was Jean-Luc Fontaine, believing he was protecting important secrets. He died a hero, never knowing he was just a loose end being tied up. The old man's hands trembled, and I went underground, completely off the grid, changed my identity, left France. I couldn't expose Ashford without evidence, and if I tried, I'd end up like Etienne. Catherine struggled to process it all. But the journal entries after November 1944, if Etienne was dead, how? I wrote them. Fontaine's voice was flat. I continued operating, continued running missions, and I kept documenting everything. The journal you have is incomplete. There's a second volume covering November 1944 through May 1945. That's what I want to give you today. He reached into his folder and pulled out an identical leather-bound journal. Catherine took it with shaking hands. In that journal, Fontaine said, you'll find evidence of everything I'm telling you. Photographs of documents from Richter's files, transcripts of conversations I recorded, proof that Ashford was running a parallel intelligence operation designed to save Nazi assets. Catherine opened the journal. The first entry was dated the 16th of November, 1944, one day after Etienne Moreau's execution. Etienne is dead. They shot him this morning in Fresnes prison. Ashford thinks the problem is solved, that Jean-Luc Fontaine is buried with Etienne's body. He's wrong. I am more alive than ever, and I will expose what he's done. For Etienne, for France, for the truth. This journal will be my weapon. J.L.F. The pages were filled with detailed accounts, meetings between British officers and German defectors, lists of extracted personnel, bank account numbers in Swiss institutions. It was damning. Why now? Catherine asked. Why wait 75 years? Fontaine's expression hardened. Because Ashford died 6 months ago. As long as he was alive, I was in danger. He had resources, connections, people who would have silenced me. But with him gone, I can finally speak. And there's another reason. He pulled out one final photograph. It showed a young man in his 30s, standing in front of the Houses of Parliament. That's Ashford's grandson, James. He's currently the deputy director of MI6, and he's about to be promoted to director. If that happens, he'll have access to the same classified files his grandfather buried, including evidence of what really happened in 1944, and he'll destroy it. Catherine felt the weight of history pressing down on her. You're saying this conspiracy is still active? I'm saying that the networks Ashford built survived him. The people he extracted, their children, their protégés, they're embedded in intelligence services across Europe. They've been protecting this secret for 3/4 of a century. Sophie moved to her father's photograph on the wall, touching the frame gently. My father died protecting a lie. These people need to answer for that. Catherine looked at the journal in her hands, then at the old man before her. If I publish this, if I expose what happened, you understand the consequences? Intelligence services will deny everything. They'll destroy your credibility, claim you're a forger, maybe worse. Fontaine smiled grimly. Professor, I'm 98 years old. I have terminal cancer. They can't threaten me with anything worse than what's already coming. But they can threaten you. What do you mean? The moment you start investigating this, you'll be watched. Your emails monitored. Your phone tapped. They'll try to discredit you. Dig up any scandal from your past. And if that doesn't work, he left the sentence unfinished. Catherine's hands had gone cold, but her resolve hardened. This was why she'd become a historian, to uncover truths that powerful people wanted buried. There's one thing I don't understand, she said. Ashford's letter to me, the one claiming Fontaine never existed. Why would he write that if he knew you were still alive? Fontaine and Sophie exchanged a glance. That's the part I haven't told you yet, Fontaine said quietly. I didn't write you that letter, Professor, and neither did William Ashford. He's been dead for 6 months. Someone else sent it, using his name. The room suddenly felt very cold. Someone wanted you to come to Normandy, Fontaine continued. Someone wanted you to find me, to hear this story, but not to publish it, to silence it. Catherine's heart pounded. Then who? The window behind Fontaine exploded. Glass shattered inward as something tore through the room. Catherine dove to the floor, her ears ringing. Sophie screamed. The old man's wheelchair toppled sideways. When Catherine looked up, she saw blood. Fontaine was on the ground, clutching his shoulder, crimson spreading across his shirt. Sniper, Sophie gasped, pulling her father away from the window. Catherine grabbed the journals, both of them, and stumbled toward the door. Behind her, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Running. Getting closer. They weren't alone. The journals. Fontaine wheezed, blood bubbling at his lips. Take them. Room 247. Nursing home. Berlin. Find Richter's daughter. She has. The final piece. More footsteps. Shouting in English. Lock down the building. No one leaves. Catherine looked at Sophie, at the dying old man, at the journals in her hands. She had seconds to decide. Sophie made the decision for her. She shoved Catherine toward a service exit. Go! Run! Tell the story! My father didn't die for nothing, neither will his friend. Catherine ran. Behind her, she heard more gunfire. Screams. Chaos erupting. She burst through the service exit into the gray Norman afternoon, the journals clutched to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't look back. She had the evidence. She had the truth. And now, someone very powerful wanted her dead. Catherine Morrison didn't go home. She couldn't. Instead, she took trains through 3 countries, changing direction randomly, paying cash, avoiding cameras. By the time she reached Berlin 48 hours later, she'd read both journals cover to cover. The evidence was devastating. Names, dates, bank accounts. Proof that dozens of Nazi officers had been quietly extracted by British intelligence in exchange for secrets. Scientists who'd later built weapons for NATO. Cryptographers who'd cracked Soviet codes. All of them war criminals who should have faced justice. But one name appeared more than any other: Klaus Richter. According to Fontaine's notes, Richter hadn't just faked his death. He'd orchestrated the entire extraction network. He was the middleman between the Nazis who wanted to survive and the Allies who wanted their knowledge. And after the war, he'd simply disappeared. Room 247. That's what Fontaine had said with his dying breath. Catherine found the address in the second journal, a modest apartment building in the Prenzlauer Berg district, not far from where the Berlin Wall once stood. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, knocked 3 times, on the door marked 247. The woman who answered was in her late 70s, elegant despite her age, with sharp gray eyes that assessed Catherine in an instant. "You're the historian," she said in accented English. "Jean-Luc said you would come. I'm Anna Richter. Please, quickly, they're watching the building." Inside, the apartment was filled with filing cabinets, boxes of documents, photographs covering every wall, a lifetime of evidence. "My father died in 1992, Anna said, pouring tea with steady hands. "But before he died, he gave me everything. His insurance policy, he called it. Proof of what he'd done, who he'd worked with, where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively." She pulled out a metal box from beneath the couch. "This is what they're afraid of, what they've been hunting for decades." Inside were photographs that made Catherine's blood run cold. British and American officers shaking hands with SS commanders. Documents signed by Ashford, authorizing the transfer of funds. And one photograph that changed everything: a group of men in a Swiss chateau, 1946. "That's Ashford," Anna pointed. "And that's my father. And that man in the center? That's Martin Vogel. He ran the Gestapo's counterintelligence division. He personally ordered the deaths of hundreds of Allied agents." Catherine stared at the photo. "Where is he now?" "He changed his name to Marcus Vaughan. Worked for MI6 for 30 years. Retired in 1978 with full honors. He died last year in London. His son, Thomas Vaughan, is currently deputy director of MI6. Catherine finished, her stomach dropping. "Ashford's grandson is James Ashford. You're telling me both of them are the grandsons of men who betrayed everything they were supposed to stand for," Anna said flatly. "And they know about each other's heritage. They've been protecting their family secrets together." Catherine felt the world shifting beneath her feet. "The letter that brought me to Normandy was sent by them. They wanted to see if Fontaine was still alive, if he still had evidence. They used you as bait, Professor. And when they confirmed he was alive, they tried to eliminate everyone who knew the truth." "Sophie? Fontaine?" Anna's expression darkened. "Sophie was arrested at the nursing home, charged with fraud, identity theft, fabricated charges. She's in custody. As for Fontaine..." She pulled out her phone, showing Catherine a news article in French. "Elderly man dies. In nursing home shooting, suspected robbery gone wrong." Catherine's eyes burned. The old spy had survived 75 years of hiding, only to be murdered when he finally tried to tell the truth. "They're cleaning up," Anna said. "Everyone who knew about the network, everyone who could testify, they're being silenced. You're next on the list, Professor. Then we go public. Now, we release everything." "To who?" Anna's laugh was bitter. "Intelligence services? They're compromised. Media? They'll call it conspiracy theory. Demand verification we can't provide without exposing sources who are now dead. The law? These people are the law." Catherine slumped in her chair, feeling the weight of it all. "Then why did you bring me here? Why tell me any of this, if we can't stop them?" Anna reached into the metal box and pulled out one final document. A handwritten letter, dated December 2018. "Because my father, for all his sins, had one moment of conscience. Read this. Catherine unfolded the letter. It was addressed to Anna, written in shaking handwriting. My dearest Anna, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and the vultures are circling. Know this. I was a coward. I saved myself by serving men more evil than I could ever be. But I kept records, not to protect myself, but to protect you. There's one thing I never told Ashford. One piece of evidence I held back. In 1945, I discovered the real reason Ashford wanted to extract German intelligence officers. It wasn't about winning the Cold War. It was personal. Ashford's brother, Thomas Ashford, was captured by the resistance in 1944. They discovered he was selling British secrets to the Germans. He wasn't an agent, he was a traitor. The family covered it up by claiming he died in combat. But Thomas didn't die. The Germans offered him protection in exchange for continued intelligence. After the war, Ashford extracted his own brother, gave him a new identity, and spent 50 years protecting that secret. The proof is in a safe deposit box in Geneva. Account number 84792 CH. The key is hidden in the false bottom of my old chess set, the one you loved as a child. Use it, expose them, and perhaps, in some small way, I can atone for what I've done. Your father. Catherine looked up, her hands trembling. Do you have it? The evidence? Anna nodded slowly. I retrieved it last month. Documents proving Thomas Ashford was a traitor, that William Ashford built his entire network to protect his brother's treason. If this comes out, it doesn't just destroy the Ashford name. It calls into question every operation MI6 ran for half a century. That's why they're so desperate. Yes, and it's why we have one chance. Anna pulled out a laptop. Tomorrow, there's a parliamentary hearing in London about intelligence oversight. Public, televised, under oath. If we can get this evidence to the right people before the hearing, a sound from outside. Footsteps on the stairs. Anna's face went pale. They're here. Catherine grabbed the metal box. Blocked. I checked this morning. Anna was already moving, pulling up the floorboards. There's a tunnel, built during the Cold War, goes 2 blocks over. Take everything. Go to the British Embassy, ask for Ambassador Patricia Hollis. She's old guard, knew my father, and she hates the current MI6 leadership. What about you? Anna smiled sadly. I'm 76 years old, Professor. I've been running from my father's shadow my whole life. It's time I stopped. The door exploded inward. Men in tactical gear poured into the apartment. Catherine saw weapons, heard shouting in English. Anna shoved her toward the tunnel entrance. Go! Tell the story! End this! Catherine dropped into darkness, clutching the metal box, hearing gunfire above her. She crawled through the tunnel, her breath ragged, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, the shooting stopped. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, was the truth that could burn down an empire of lies. She kept crawling. The British Embassy in Berlin was a fortress of glass and steel, but Catherine Morrison didn't walk through the front door. She used the tunnel Anna had shown her, emerging in a maintenance basement 3 buildings away. From there, a service entrance, a bribed janitor, a desperate climb through ventilation shafts that her academic career had never prepared her for. When she finally stumbled into Ambassador Patricia Hollis's office, covered in dirt and blood that wasn't hers, the elderly diplomat simply poured her a brandy. Anna Richter called me 6 hours ago, Hollis said quietly. She told me you'd be coming. She also told me she probably wouldn't survive the day. Catherine's throat tightened. She saved my life. She saved more than that. Hollis gestured to the metal box. Is that it? Catherine nodded, opening it. She spread the documents across the ambassador's desk, photographs, letters, bank statements, the journal, everything. Hollis examined them in silence, her expression hardening with each page. Finally, she looked up. This is enough to destroy MI6's credibility for a generation. Good. Catherine said flatly. "You don't understand, Professor. I don't mean embarrass them. I mean literally destroy them. Every operation they're running, every asset in the field, every alliance, all of it compromised. People will die." Catherine had thought about this during her desperate flight through Europe. People are already dying. Sophie Moreau is in prison for trying to tell the truth about her father. Jean-Luc Fontaine was murdered. Anna Richter. Her voice cracked. How many more died to protect a 75-year-old lie? Hollis was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. "I'm calling the head of Parliamentary Intelligence Oversight. This goes public tomorrow at the hearing. But you need to understand something. Once this is out, you'll never be safe. These people have long memories. I stopped being safe the moment I opened that journal." The next 24 hours were a blur. Secure facilities. Lawyers. Statements recorded. Documents authenticated by forensic experts who confirmed the age and authenticity of the evidence. And then, the hearing. Catherine sat in the witness gallery of Parliament, watching as the evidence was presented. Photographs displayed on enormous screens, bank statements, the letter from Klaus Richter, Fontaine's journals. And finally, the smoking gun documents, proving that Thomas Ashford had been a Nazi collaborator and his brother had spent 50 years protecting him. The chamber erupted in chaos. James Ashford, the deputy director, sat stone-faced as members of Parliament demanded his resignation, called for investigations, shouted about treason. Beside him, Thomas Vaughan, grandson of the Gestapo officer, stared straight ahead, his career disintegrating in real time. But Catherine wasn't watching them. She was watching the screen, where a photograph from 1944 had just appeared. Etienne Moreau, the petty criminal who died believing he was a hero named Jean-Luc Fontaine. Sophie Moreau had been released that morning, all charges dropped. She sat in the gallery across from Catherine, tears streaming down her face as her father's story was finally told to the world. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, both Ashford and Vaughan had resigned. Criminal investigations were announced. The Prime Minister promised a full review of intelligence operations dating back to World War II. But Catherine felt no triumph, only exhaustion. That evening, she met Sophie outside Parliament. They stood together in the rain, watching news crews pack up their equipment. "Your father was a hero," Catherine said. "The world knows that now." Sophie shook her head. "My father was a criminal who was used by people more ruthless than he ever was. But in the end, he did one heroic thing. He died believing in something larger than himself. Even if that belief was a lie, it made him brave. That's enough. And Fontaine? He tried to make it right. 75 years of hiding, of guilt, and in the end, he sacrificed everything to tell the truth." Sophie looked at Catherine. "What will you do now?" "Write the book. Tell the whole story. Make sure Etienne and Jean-Luc and Anna and all the others who died aren't forgotten. They'll come for you, eventually. People like Ashford and Vaughan, they have friends, resources." Catherine had thought about that too. Probably. But the truth is out now. It's not just me anymore. It's journalists, investigators, historians. The story is bigger than any one person. Sophie smiled sadly. That's what Jean-Luc said in his journal. Make the truth bigger than the lie. I think he'd be proud. They parted ways in the rain, two women connected by a conspiracy that had spanned 3/4 of a century. Catherine returned to Oxford, to her office filled with books about World War II. But now, she had a new story to tell. The story of the spy who never existed, and all the real people who died in his shadow. She opened her laptop and began to write. This is the story of Jean-Luc Fontaine, a hero who was actually many people, and Etienne Moreau, a nobody who became a legend. This is the story of the ghosts we create to win wars, and the real lives destroyed to maintain the illusion. This is the story of how heroes are made, and how they're unmade when they become inconvenient. This is the story of the spy who never existed, and the truth that refused to die. 3 months later, her book topped bestseller lists across Europe. Documentaries were made. Trials were held. Intelligence agencies reformed their oversight. But late at night, Catherine still thought about the people she'd never met. Etienne, who died protecting secrets he didn't have. Anna, who'd sacrificed herself to end her father's legacy. And Fontaine, the old man who'd spent 75 years in hiding, waiting for the chance to make things right. In her desk drawer, she kept one photograph. It showed 2 young men in Marseille, 1940, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. On the back, in faded ink, Jean-Luc and Etienne, brothers, forever. The spy who never existed had been real after all. Not as a single person, but as an idea that ordinary people could become extraordinary when they believed in something worth dying for. Even if that belief was built on a lie, the courage was real, the sacrifice was real. And now, finally, the truth was real too.